Monday, 1st of November, 1993. Preston, northwest England. Two males stand in the accused dock at the Sessions House courtroom. They were charged with an horrific murder. But this was no ordinary murder trial. Hundreds of protesters had gathered outside, screaming and shouting, baying for blood. They had been understandably sickened and angered by this murder, for the victim was a bright-eyed boy of only 2 years old. But what was worse was the two perpetrators were only 10 years old. Today, Descent into Darkness examines the case that shook the nation in When Kids Kill, the murder of James Bulger. Background: John Venables. Both boys attended St Mary's Church of England Primary School, or grade school to my American friends, in the Walton area of Liverpool, a beautiful Grade 2 listed building of typical Victorian style. There is some footage of them taken around 8 months before the murder that shows them playing in typical school games. Venables had only been transferred to St Mary's that year, having previously attended Broad Square Junior School, but was expelled due to deteriorating behaviour, with no sign of letting up. The middle of 3, John's erratic behaviour was immediately apparent whenever he did show up at school. Variously, he would tear things down from the wall that the teachers had put up on display. He would cut his arms whenever he could get hold of some scissors, and hid under tables, out of sight and easy reach of his teachers. At one stage, he even attempted to choke one of his classmates by pressing a ruler into their throat. This disturbing pattern of behaviour suggests, to me anyway, that John was perhaps suffering from either abuse at home or was witnessing it between his parents. It is not clear whether this abuse was mental, physical or sexual, but hold on to that thought for later. It is also worth noting that his elder and younger siblings both had learning difficulties, so it could also well be argued that his behaviour was an outlet for the lack of attention that he got at home due to the extra needs of his siblings. Upon joining St Mary's School, he very quickly gained a new friend, another troubled young boy, in whom John had found a kindred spirit. The two quickly became inseparable. Background: Robert Thompson. A former neighbour of the family, whose son was one of Robert's very short list of friends who wished to remain anonymous, was quoted as saying of Thompson, "I didn't look upon Robert as being evil, as, in my eyes, what I've seen of Robert, he was a little boy that just got up to mischievous things, like every other little boy." It is said that Thompson suffered at the hands of bullies during his earliest school years, and was far from being counted amongst the so-called cool kids. Both Venables and Thompson were regularly truant from school, what we in the UK would call either playing hooky or twagging, regularly sneaking out of the other gate from where their mums had dropped them off in the morning. Instead, spending their days amusing themselves with shoplifting, low-level vandalism, creating a little den for themselves, and other activities that even yours truly was not immune to back in the day. Naughty, naughty DID. The pair regularly stayed out till very late at night, but neither were ever meaningfully punished by their parents for this behaviour. The neighbour quoted earlier also stated that while she did worry about when her son had not come home at a normal time, and did go looking for him, she did not inform the police, as this would inevitably involve social services, which does not exactly enjoy the most stellar of reputations in the UK amongst the poor and working class families. It is therefore fairly safe to assume that Thompson and Venables' parents were of a similar mindset. Despite the various points of difficult behaviours, there was no reason to suspect that either boy had the makings of a monster buried within them. Sadly, the evil that unknowingly lurked within was about to bare its teeth in the most shocking way imaginable. A young life snuffed out. James, or Jamie Patrick Bulger, was born on the 16th of March 1990 in the town of Kirkby in Merseyside. On the 12th of February 1993, his mother Denise had taken him out with her while she went shopping for the essentials in Bootle Town Centre. Denise and James had gone into a shopping centre in the New Strand as she wanted to visit the butcher shop of A.R. Tim there. Denise had been diligently looking after her boy like any good parent, but the briefest moment was all it took for every parent's worst nightmare to happen. Thompson and Venables had been messing around near the Strand that day. They were playing hooky from school and were making a general nuisance of themselves, hanging around the shopping centre and stealing whenever they spotted an opportunity. More sinisterly, however, they had also been caught attempting to lead away a 2-year-old child from his parents earlier that day. Thankfully for that child, the parents had caught them and chased them off. Tragically, John and Robert then spotted a 2-year-old boy who had just wandered out of the butcher's shop in a fleeting moment of distraction from his mother as she was forced to briefly let go of wee Jamie's hand to pay the butcher. CCTV footage, captured at 15:42, showed little Jamie Bulger being led away by the hand out of the shopping centre by Thompson. Naturally, as soon as she realised that Jamie was missing, Denise instantly began to panic, running off and asked for the police to be called. The wee lad was reported missing and a large-scale civilian search was begun almost instantly. In a cruel twist of fate, had Denise ran the opposite way from which she did, she almost certainly would have spotted her son being led away. The 3 kids had been seen by a few people a fair distance from the Strand where James had been taken, most notably down near a canal a 1/4 mile away. By this time, James had an abrasion on his forehead and was holding his right arm as if it had been hurt. It was later revealed that his abductors had attempted to make him fall in the water, but they had been unsuccessful in this, and that is what had caused the abrasion in the hurt arm. In all, the boys were witnessed by no less than 38 different people, but none of them felt the need to report the sighting to the police or insist on taking them to the police station. Each person in turn spoke to them, believing the excuses of Thompson and Venables and their promises that they were already on their way to the police station. The media had, quite rightly, led with the story of the search for Jamie at every turn. Denise was filmed before a press conference in floods of tears, pleading that she just wanted her baby back. 48 hours after Jamie disappeared, a phone call came in with the worst possible news. Jamie's broken body was discovered by another group of children who had trespassed onto the railway line near Walton railway station, 2.5 miles away from where he had been taken. His body had been cut in two by a train's wheels, but this was not the cause of death. His lower half had been stripped naked. Forensic examinations instantly saw that he had been subjected to an horrific and sustained attack with various blunt objects all over his body. He had been repeatedly kicked and stamped on, and worryingly, it was discovered that his foreskin had been forcibly retracted. He had been hit with stones, bricks, and even a piece of the railway track known as a fish plate, a thick piece of steel with holes in it, used to tie 2 lengths of rails together that weighs around 10 kilograms or 22 pounds. This plate had been dropped on Jamie's head. His skull had sustained at least 10 separate fractures, severe and catastrophic brain damage, and a large brain hemorrhage. He had also been hit in the eye with a small tin of blue paint that the pair had shoplifted earlier in the day. One thing, though, that I feel should be addressed here is that there are some extra details of the injuries that wee James suffered before he was killed. Most notably, that he had had a battery inserted into his rectum. However, whilst batteries were found stuffed into James's mouth, the other rumour is completely without merit. The forensic pathologist who examined James's body categorically denied that this was the case. Although, given the stripping of James's clothes off of his lower body, it appears to me that there was certainly more to the underlying motivation of the murder. It has never been admitted by either Thompson or Venables as to whether anything further had occurred to James, particularly in regarding to any sexual assault. Arrest and confessions. Police were told by witnesses that they saw two older children leading a toddler away from the shopping centre. Various lines of inquiry led the police to the doors of the Venables and Thompson families. Once the two boys were taken in for questioning, the police were highly mindful that they were not dealing with your everyday type criminals. They decided on a softly approach, not pressuring either of them in their separate interviews in the presence of their parents. The interview tapes of the two kids shows just how much they were beginning to panic after initially showing defiance to the questions. It could be argued, of course, that they were truly scared by the whole ordeal, as they were just children themselves, but equally, the counterpoint is that the terrified voices, weeping and tears, were in a vain attempt of self-preservation. They can both be heard pleading and crying that they didn't mean to kill him, begging their parents to believe them, and of course, blaming the other and saying it was all their doing, and they had nothing to do with any of it. The tapes are a shocking and disturbing record of the case. I shall link a couple of the sources to parts of the tapes in the description. Both sets of parents sat down with their respective sons in private and told them that no matter what has happened, that they still would love him. John was the first to break. He began to tell the truth about what exactly had happened that day. He told of how they led James away and how they had taken him down by the canal and then further onto the railway line. And there, they had begun the assault in earnest. They threw stones and bricks at Jamie, hitting him in the head and kicking him repeatedly. Finally, breaking down and weeping deeply, John even asked his interrogators to tell his mum I'm sorry. Thompson remained defiant a little longer, but slowly began to reveal more and more details. It was even revealed that how they had planned to abduct another child earlier in the day with the intention of callously pushing them into oncoming traffic. One of them, in their ignorance, even asked if Jamie had been taken to the hospital to, quote, get him alive again. Both boys were formally charged with murder on the 20th of February 1993 and were remanded in custody to await their trial. Trial. When the pair appeared before the court in Preston on the 1st of November 1993, due to their age, they were only referred to as A and B. A crowd of hundreds had gathered outside the court, with one or two attempting to attack the two prisoner transport vans as it approached, banging on the sides and screaming words of pure, blinding hatred at the boys inside. The police were able to contain the majority of the crowd, who nonetheless gutturally yelled from the other side of the cordoned street. When they were led into the courtroom, they had to sit on risers on their chairs so that they could be seen over the top of the dock, further emphasizing their tender youth. Due to the nature of their offence, they were tried as adults, as the age of UK criminal responsibility is 10 years old, and by this point both boys had turned 11. Both of them pled not guilty to the charges of murder, abduction and attempted abduction. The pathologist report was read out in full, as were the majority of the 20-hour confession tapes. However, 4 of those tapes were withheld from being played in open court, as they were deemed to be too distressing. Those tapes have never been released. The defence attempted to argue that the boys lacked capacity for criminal responsibility due to their age, but this was struck down when the prosecution rebutted that both of them were capable of, quote, mischievous discretion, meaning that they were fully aware that their actions could be seen as wrong, and therefore could be classed as criminally responsible. Both of the child psychologists that had interviewed each boy were firmly of the opinion that they both knew fine well the difference between right and wrong, even being asked specifically if they thought that the taking of a child from their parents was bad. This, of course, significantly bolstered the prosecution's case. Hard evidence from the scene included a total of 27 bricks, some of which were blood-stained, Jamie's clothing, and of course the heavy rusted fish plate. Jamie's blood had been matched on bloodstains found on one of the boys' shoes. The paint was also matched to flecks found on their clothing. It was found that the whole venture had been mostly Robert Thompson's idea, although it was John Venables who suggested taking Jamie onto the railway line. Even Thompson's own lawyer had later said that he had found the young boy frightening, even going so far as to compare him to the Pied Piper. The various witnesses that had seen them through the day had reported that at various times Jamie was being led by the hand by both boys, with the other one walking separately, suggesting that both had taken an active role. Chillingly, it was also discovered that Thompson had actually accompanied a neighbour to the foot of the railway embankment where Jamie's body was found, to lay flowers. The neighbour said that Robert spent some time looking at the many hundreds of tributes that other people had left. With the defence's arguments handily rebuffed, the verdict was almost a foregone conclusion. The trial lasted a full 25 days. The jury took only 6 hours to decide their verdict. During sentencing, the judge, Mr. Justice Morland, said of the pair that they had committed a crime of unparalleled evil and barbarity. In my judgment, your conduct was both cunning and very wicked. When it comes to the trial of children, when they are found guilty, the only sentence that can be passed is to be detained until Her Majesty's pleasure be known, or in other words, indefinitely. And so, both boys became the youngest ever to have been convicted of murder in Britain. Imprisonment and release. For obvious reasons, it has never been disclosed where the two were incarcerated until after their releases. It was later discovered that Venables had been held at the Red Bank Secure Unit in St Helens, and that Thompson had been confined at Barton Moss Secure Care Facility in Manchester. There is an ongoing gagging order prohibiting any subsequent pictures of them being published or circulated. Over the years, there have been a few instances of people being prosecuted for sharing alleged images of Thompson and Venables. Whether the pictures truly were the pair has obviously never been outright confirmed. Both have been said to have been suffering from extreme PTSD in the wake of Jamie's murder, with Thompson especially suffering from night terrors, although I can't really say that I have much sympathy there given the circumstances. In 1994, a campaign fronted by the Sun newspaper had gathered over 280,000 signatures that the time the two were to spend imprisoned should be greatly increased. The then Home Secretary Michael Howard had acquiesced to this and had ruled that they should not be eligible for release until early 2008, but this was overturned in the High Court in 1997 as unlawful. The Justice for James Foundation was set up by Merseyside residents, including Denise, who now goes by the surname of Fergus, with the express purpose of campaigning and lobbying to ensure that James's killers are never released. The campaign is vociferously led by local Liverpool radio DJ Pete Price, who has hosted regular phone-in debates on the topic during his show whenever the story resurfaces. As part of their rehabilitation, both of them have been allowed out on supervised visits to various towns and cities throughout the north of England as a day trip. This is seen as a way of easing them back into society if or when they are found eligible for parole. They have also been given spending money to go on small shopping trips for new clothing, etc., at places such as the Trafford Centre in Manchester. Scary to think that you or I could have easily walked right past them or even served them in a shop and been none the wiser. Both have also managed to pass A-levels through the system as well. This particular detail kind of sticks in my craw a little bit, if I'm being honest. They committed murder at the age of 10, but then go on to somehow achieve a higher level of education than I did. WTF. After a 6-month-long review of their cases and subsequent behaviour whilst detained, the pair were granted parole in the June of 2001. Only 8 years after the murder, with Home Secretary David Blunkett approving the decision, much to the outcry of the public. They were released on a lifelong licence, meaning that they would have to adhere to certain specific rules, such as not contacting each other or the Bulger family, and never returning to Merseyside. Both were given whole new identities for them to avoid their new locations being known to the public. It is said that they had even lost their Scouse accents. Whether this was a deliberately learned thing or had occurred naturally is not known. John Venables was recalled to prison following a breach of the terms of his license in 2010. During his time of freedom, he had also been in a relationship with a woman who had a 5-year-old child, although he claimed to have not been introduced to them. He also went through a slew of girlfriends, no doubt making up for the time that he had spent away from such temptations. He had also begun drinking and using narcotics, notably cocaine. It's worth noting here that offenders out on license for offences like this have to report any relationships to their probation officer as per their license conditions. Failure to disclose can be grounds for instant recall. In 2013, Venables was released again on license, but in late November 2017, he was rearrested on fresh charges. Worryingly, these were in relation to possession of indecent images of children. He pled guilty to this, and the court was told that he also possessed a so-called paedophile manual that offered advice to child abusers on how to avoid detection and how to groom minors. Shortly before his release, Thompson was alleged to have had sex with one of the female members of staff at the unit where he was held. That member of staff in question was suspended for sexual misconduct and has not worked there since. As they have grown, neither of them have opened up or admitted any sexual element of what they did to Jamie, but the evidence at the scene would at least suggest that there was one. Both are said to have made significant progress on their rehabilitation since their conviction, but judging by Venables' recalls to prison, clearly not enough. Sadly, there have been a few occasions where people have been accused of being one of the notorious pair and outed to their local community, only for it to then be proven untrue, but not before significant distress and even attacks had been carried out on the poor unfortunates. Another horrible chapter to this was that in July of 2016, a woman living in the town of Margate in Kent was jailed for messaging Jamie's mother Denise on Twitter, pretending to be one of the killers, and also, even more sickeningly, Jamie's ghost. As if this case didn't already have enough evil in it. There has also been serious suggestions that John Venables would be better off being resettled in an entirely different country, most notably Canada or New Zealand, although the then Kiwi PM Jacinda Ardern had stated that he need not apply. For Canada's sake, I hope they said the same. Legacy. The James Bulger case was one that completely shocked the entire nation. It is always bad enough when one so young is murdered, but for them to be killed by other children. People are not prepared for that in their minds. Children are always portrayed as the picture of innocence, and for the most part, it is true. But anyone who has ever studied murderers will see that the warning signs regularly begin to manifest in childhood. For them to have fully bloomed in a 10-year-old is extremely rare. For it to happen in 2 10-year-olds, well, this is a minor miracle in and of itself, but not the kind of miracle that would make one rejoice. John Venables and Robert Thompson, despite their tender years, were pure evil, plain and simple. A life of unchecked behaviour without consequence led them to their horrific deed. Their evil is obvious, as it was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. They had actively planned this and had made other attempts earlier in the day with other children that were not successful. The fact that they persisted without stopping to question what the hell they were doing shows their true colours. Most children can easily distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. Those rare few that can't make this decision need this issue to be immediately addressed through professional help. Some had attempted to argue that the boys may have been influenced by so-called video nasties, a manufactured scourge by heavily conservative public figures such as Mary Whitehouse, who had coined the phrase, implying that it was horror movies that had caused the pair to commit murder, but as anyone with half a brain cell spare will know, there is absolutely no link between violence in film and video games and outward practicing of those behaviours. But it always makes for a perennial news headline that simply refuses to bugger off. Although to satisfy the public, Merseyside police did investigate the films that the Venables household had rented in the months prior to the murder, and according to one detective, they concluded, "We went through something like 200 titles rented by the Venables family. There were some you or I wouldn't want to see, but nothing, no scene or plot or dialogue where you could put your finger on the freeze button and say that influenced a boy to go out and commit murder." The time that they have spent incarcerated does not, in Venables' case, seem to have altered or rehabilitated his character. Thompson, or whatever he is calling himself these days, will have to spend every minute of every day looking over his shoulder and praying to all that is holy that his true identity is not uncovered. The people of Liverpool are united in their hatred of the two, and there are those amongst them who would not rest until they find out where they are or how to get to them in some way. Now, of course, I would never advocate for any such vigilantism or extrajudicial retribution, but I can understand the sentiments behind such intentions. However, we must not allow ourselves to be dragged down to their level. There is plenty to criticise our legal system for, and as one who has worked for, at the time, Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, I can name many reasons why it sucks. But it is the only system we have, and we must place our trust within it to prevent anarchy from prevailing. If John Venables ever gets out again, it'll be too soon. If Robert Thompson is recalled to prison, it will be entirely his own fault, and there are many people who will be glad to hear it. Just over 30 years on, and with Thompson and Venables now aged 40 at the time of writing, we can only hope that lessons have been learned in the management of young offenders, and new approaches have been implemented. Only time will tell. The interrogation of Thompson and Venables was dramatised in a 2019 short film called Detainment, and is available to view on YouTube. Link in the description. Jamie Bulger lost his life for no reason at all, save for the sadistic nature of his murderers. Not even 2 summers on this earth, a bright-eyed, joyful wee boy who had no chance to see the world and live to the fullest. Where is the justice in that? Jamie, I sincerely hope that despite the disgusting things that happened to you in your final hours, your soul is at eternal peace. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it informative and interesting, despite the harrowing topic. I appreciate that this one was tough going. Please smash the old like button and subscribe, and check out my back catalogue for some more great in-depth content like this, and share the channel far and wide. After all, misery loves company. What are your thoughts on Venables and Thompson? Was their punishment sufficient? Should they have ever been allowed out? Can there be any chance of them being truly rehabilitated? I'd like to hear what you have to say. I'm sure this one will generate much debate. If you wish to do so, you can support DID on Patreon, link in the description, or if you prefer to go down the one-off donation route, you can do so via the Super Thanks button. Or better yet, grab yourself some sweet swag from the DID merch store. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, and I shall see you on our next descent into darkness.